Good morning and welcome to apologies for the slight delay with getting this session started. We've had a few technical difficulties, which is also why I'm joining by phone rather than video call. My name is Carl Brown. I'm the head of content at Assemble Media Group, and I'll be chairing this session, which is the first of 6 webinars we are running this week on all things digital in construction. This one is titled Implementing Building and Fire Safety Reform. It's difficult to believe in some ways that we are now more than 5 years on from the horror of Grenfell, and we now have a piece of legislation on the statute book which is intended to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. The mammoth Building Safety Act, with its 262 pages, achieved royal assent in April, but quite a few of the provisions won't actually come into effect for a few weeks or months through regulations. The Act brings in a gateway point system to ensure building safety regulatory requirements are met at different stages of the planning process. As part of this system, developers will have to create, hold, and maintain a golden thread of information, basically a digital record to ensure that the right people have the right information at the right time to ensure buildings are safe. And as you can imagine, the data requirements of managing and embedding this golden thread and meeting the gateways 2 and 3 of the Act will require digital and technological solutions. And to help us discuss what some of these may be and some of the challenges involved, I'm delighted to tell you we have a great panel today to talk about this topic, who I shall now introduce. We have Janine Coyote, who is the Principal Fire Engineer at OFR Consultants. And we have Stuart Byford, who is BIM Lead at BPTW. Each of our panelists will speak for around 10 to 15 minutes, and that should give us plenty of time to take your questions at the end. And do feel free to send through your questions. You should be able to see a box on the right-hand side of your screen that will allow you to type in your question, and I'll try and get around to as many of them as I can. But that's all from me. I'm going to hand over now to Janine. Janine, over to you.
Thank you so much, Carl, for the wonderful introduction. So, and let me just share my screen.
If you could just go on slideshow. Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So, yeah. So again, thank you guys for having me. My name is Janine Coyote, and I'm an associate at OFR Fire Consultants. I'm delighted here to talk about the golden thread and data requirements of the Building Safety Act. And possible technology already out there that could help with implementing the golden thread. So as Carl's mentioned, the golden thread will be that digitally stored collection of information about a building. It should contain all the information needed to understand the building and how it should be managed throughout its lifestyle, its entire life cycle. There are 10 kind of guiding principles that will underpin the golden thread. These principles will inform the secondary legislations and regulations that will be forthcoming. So things like making sure the data is accurate and trusted. So the golden thread must be able to be used by relevant people to maintain the building, to manage the building safety and ensure compliance with the building regulation. The regulator is also going to be using this information to assess, for example, the safety case reports for the property and hold people to account. It needs to operate as a source of evidence to show how building safety risks are understood and managed on an ongoing basis. The information must be accurate, structured, and verified, requiring a clear change control process that sets out how and when information is updated and who should be check and update the information. So it's all about, residents feeling secure in their home. It's about a culture change. It's about having a single source of truth. So we need to bring all the information together to form one single point. So we need to reduce duplication of any changes to information. So any changes should be tracked meticulously, including how we arrived at the decision. So that decision-making process would also need to be transparent. So we need to increase accountability of that data. The data obviously needs to be secure. So it would need to comply with the relevant GDPR requirements. It needs to be accountable. So again, with the whole principle of this single source of truth, any changes or updates, addition, deletions to the information forming the golden thread should be there in record in terms of who made changes to it, ensuring that people are accountable at every level. That information also needs to be understandable and consistent. So there should be a clear and understandable information focusing on the needs of the user by using standardized methods, processes. They need to have consistent terminologies. The data also needs to be simple to access. So the golden thread should be accessible to enable users to be able to easily find the right information at the right time. The information should be stored in like a structured way. So we need to have some form of a library to enable users to easily find, extract, and update information. It needs to be durable, shareable, and for the longevity. So the golden thread of information should be formatted in a way that it can be handed over and maintained throughout the lifetime of a building. And lastly, it needs to be relevant and proportionate. So as the building, as the life cycle of the building continues, that information should be reviewed and updated periodically. Information that is no longer relevant to the building safety does not need to be kept, so that information that is stored, it remains useful to all. So in kind of like summary, that information needs to remain shareable and cover the entire life of the design through procurement, materials and components, data within material and components data, and making sure that there is adequate resources available to support the level of compliance required for the fire safety. That data needs to be interoperable. So it needs to exist independently of the technology that was used to create it. So it needs to, be able to last for a very, very long time. So obviously previously, to some degree, there was a reliance on paper-based records and not digital records. With the new act, all records need to be digital. And, there are a lot of buildings that, date back to the 60s, 70s that would have paper-based information like the drawing schedules and the O&M manuals, etc. So where there is any form of analog data going forward, they will need to be stored digitally so that they could be more easily accessible by all. So this new British standard, covering the digital standard for record keeping for high-risk buildings, has come into effect now since the 31st of July 2022, and it's applicable to both existing and new buildings. It effectively covers kind of the British standard recommendations for data management across the entire building life cycle. So it's that whole process of making sure that we have a single source of truth throughout the life cycle of the building. So it's encouraging transparency. So during the concept, planning, design, pre-construction, construction, handover, and operations, it's the idea that the information will flow through all the processes and have a real value at each stage, so that at every step within the kind of the the REBA stages, or different parts, key parts of the stages for the building design, you have this information exchange point where like that information needs to be kind of uploaded or exchanged so that that's captured. So with that technology, with the use of this kind of system, we will have all the information relevant and that should give us a real value at each stage. So the information is effectively being handed over to each responsible party to add more to that set of information. It will be a system that is maintained and accessed by all relevant parties throughout the working life of the building. So it's this idea of Fire IE, I'm not really sure how it's pronounced. And it's going to be a repository which can be anything as long as it's accessible for whoever needs to gain access to it. And it requires all the buildings to have a common data depository, so something like BIM, but the standard does not exclude other data storage places such as A-Site, ShareBox, SharePoint, etc. So there are a lot of tools out there already. There's software that we probably are all familiar with, such as Revit, Autodesk, MBS, which utilize BIM. There's also a Revit plugin for fire safety designs called Brea BIM Fire Tools, which lets fire safety information integrate directly into the BIM process for digital workflow. It's quite an easy tool to use, and I've previously used it on projects to kind of create fire spreadsheet drawings, and kind of you're able to add information into that Revit model, which is really useful. The intention is to effectively have all the properties of all the fire safety features captured together and be combined going forward. So you would have fire resistance, reaction to fire, exposure direction, suppression requirements, maintenance clearance requirements, etc., all kind of combined for each relevant feature. So having more software that allows this kind of collaboration is key to ease of workflow in meeting the golden thread. A lot of the information that would typically be captured within a fire safety report, it needs to kind of be more closely associated and linked to fire safety features, so that everything kind of the information kind of sits together rather than being in multiple separate drawings that aren't closely linked. So there is a lot of data that will need to be captured for high-risk buildings going forward. It would be more straightforward for new buildings and existing, as information about some of these existing buildings will need to be gathered where they're not already stored. But I do think that it's definitely a good step forward, and there are a lot of tools already kind of on the market that will be able to help with this process. And I think that's where I've gotten to with this.
Okay, thanks, Janine. That was a really great run through there of the data requirements of the Act, and sort of a brief sort of description of the culture change that's required. We were going to come to Stuart Byford of BPTW, but he seems to have dropped out of the webinar at the moment. So, if it's okay with you, Janine, I thought I could ask you a few questions and then hopefully go back to Stuart when he's back on the call. Yeah. Hopefully. Just on, I think we should start by talking about this. You mentioned that you need a kind of single source of truth throughout the life cycle of the building, and that's kind of what I suppose really that's what the regulatory requirements are trying to get to. I suppose really I'm just wondering whether you could say a bit more about how you ensure that all the sort of relevant stakeholders sort of accept that is the data, how they can access it easily?
So at the beginning of every project, so the kind of like the client would need to set out what would be the information requirements. So it's something that everyone kind of will sign up to at the beginning of all projects. So there should be kind of an agreement in terms of what the asset information requirements are, and how and what kind of processes is going to be used to kind of capture the data. So that's something like that framework kind of needs to be set up from the beginning of the job so that everyone is clear. And then
yeah, and the data has to be, presumably, I mean, you talked about it being interoperable, the system, but there has to be an element of compatibility, doesn't there, with with presumably the new regulator systems and the way other stakeholders can access it. So how do you make sure that the data is easy for everybody to understand and access?
Yeah, so I mean, that's why software such as, like using tools such as Revit or, BIM, or it's effectively finding the right way to kind of have a library where you have consistent naming conventions, so everyone doesn't refer to things in different ways. The way in which the information, like drawings, are stored, they need to have a consistent kind of naming convention. So you would kind of have an idea of how things are structured. So it needs to be similar to like how a library is set up, where you know where to find a book, and it could be a massive library, but because there is that structure in place, everyone learns how to use that structure, and then that's how you would be able to know how to navigate this kind of data depository.
Yeah. So you think that over time there'll be an understanding will develop of how to kind of understand and access and work around this data.
Yeah, which is why there is this kind of trying to standardize everything and kind of have, specific ways in which you kind of link an asset to, its data. And so obviously there are already softwares on the market that kind of do those things already. What, maybe not all of them for fire, but as I said, there is tools that can link into a bit like into Revit, where you can store some of that information, and it would already have a kind of a standard way of naming the properties. And as long as everyone's kind of signed up to that standardization, then you know what to look for when you're searching for something.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move on to some of our audience questions, because we've already had quite a lot of questions coming in. I can't actually see who the questions are from, but I am getting the questions coming through to me, which is good. I think the first one is, how does the golden thread apply to residential and extensions, etc.?
I think, as I said, it's gonna apply to both existing and new buildings. So we need to be able to capture it for all buildings going forward, because the building safety regulator, like there needs to be a building safety case for existing buildings and new buildings at some point. So whether, as I said, they may need to gather information retrospectively about existing buildings in order to capture them, but it's not just something that is for new buildings only.
Yeah, okay. And that brings us on to our next question, actually, which is on a similar theme. Somebody wants to know, what are the timescales for digitizing analog records for existing buildings? Presumably they mean, how far back do you have to go?
To be honest, I think the way in which I read the British Standard, it's like you need to capture any building that is a higher risk, defined as a higher risk building that it applies to, because at the end of the day, if the building is in use, and as I said, the building regulator will be kind of regulating these buildings, then they need to have building safety case, and they will need to have all the data for these buildings captured. So I don't know if there is a timeline in terms of when it will stop, because people are living in these buildings.
Yes, so you have to build the building safety case. It's not about having sort of set rules for timescales or anything like that. If it's a building that's in use, you have to build that case.
Yeah, I mean, that's my understanding, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Another question we've got through here says, will an existing building with multiple accountable persons need to share a system managed by a principal accounting person? Who would pay for that system, and will there be duplication between the accountable persons and the principal accountable persons?
To be honest, it's a really good question. I am not sure what the answer is to that, but I'd assume that any relevant party that needs access to the information needs to be able to access it, which is the whole point of the golden thread. So if there's something that is relevant in the building that they're working on, there's some sort of overarching strategy or information, then I'd presume they would also, everyone needs to be able to have access to that, because it's the whole point of transparency, right? So you shouldn't be excluded from data if it's relevant to you.
Yeah. Okay. And the point about duplication of effort, I suppose, really, and of systems between the principal accountable person and the accountable person. Do you see that as a legitimate kind of concern, or do you not see that as an issue potentially?
I mean, the way in which the new standard kind of lays out the information, it's like there's a lot of different kind of subgroups. So, for example, it would ask what's the facility, and then you would kind of put in all the relevant information about the facility, where it's located, all sorts of stuff. So, I mean, there is kind of already a process that is mapped out a bit in the 86441. Yes, I guess there may be some risk of duplication, but I would say that it would be prudent to try to avoid that as much as possible. I mean, it's a new process, so it's kind of hard to say what's going to happen, but it's trying to not have information that is not relevant, because there's going to be a lot of information that's going to be stored. So trying to whittle that down to, as I said, proportional relevant information at that point in time is the key.
Do you think people will err on the side of firms will err on the side of caution and keep more data rather than less? As you know, because it's a balance, isn't it? You should only keep the relevant information, but you don't want to run the risk that you haven't got relevant information. So
yeah, probably. But then over time, as you said, you can update the information or you can delete things. So maybe people start off with putting more information because they're not sure, but you can update it, and because there's a record of who deleted what and why, it still allows you to see what was deleted. So you could probably put more on, like what you said before, but then eventually you realize that's actually not pertinent, or it's kind of non-relevant information anymore. So you're able to remove information that's no longer necessary.
Okay, well, the questions are coming through thick and fast. We still haven't got Stuart Byford back, so but you're doing a fantastic job at fielding all these questions you need. So we'll plough on. I just wanted to I'll come to some more of the audience's questions in a minute, but I just wondered whether you could say a little bit more about the cultural change that's required in the way the construction industry handles its data. How do you see, I mean, the software systems, the specific type of software solution aside, how do you see, what is the big change for the industry in terms of how it has to handle data going forward because of this act?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the cultural change, it's just making sure that you know, we're documenting and demonstrating that we have the right competency, you know, in terms of installing all these fire safety features, that, you know, the people that are installing or certifying understand the, you know, the properties of these materials, the right working processes and practices, and are able to document the information in the right way. So even like on, you know, during construction, we need to be kind of documenting that process as well. And it is being done already. So I definitely wouldn't say that it's not being done already, but it's just obviously the kind of change is just basically doing more. So even in terms of the standard, it goes down to the granular detail in terms of personnel and the competencies that are part of the project. So it wants a lot more information than before. So you would need to be sharing people and competencies and, you know, kind of demonstrating why they are appropriate.
Okay, so there's a bit there about the sort of the new approach. I was wondering whether as a result we need different skills as a result of this. And one of the audience's question is, does this call for a new discipline or role in the development project team, or will it typically be undertaken by a project manager or fire engineer? I'm not exactly sure what the it there is, but I think the general thrust of the question is, is it a new discipline? Do we need new roles? That kind of thing.
I mean, I don't necessarily, to be honest, it's quite difficult to say right now, but so a lot of the information is kind of already there. It's just how it's being combined. So if you take like a fire strategy report, it will talk about, you know, let's say you have a fire stopping element or something like that. You know, you already know what the fire resistance is. If it, you know, the exposure direction, the kind of maintenance or any kind of clear requirements or exit widths and all that stuff, that's already documented there. I think it's that putting that information in to combine into, like, let's say a BIM model or something like that, so that each asset or each kind of property has all those things kind of tagged with it. So, and I mean, everyone's kind of have some sort of ownership. So it's not just the fire engineer or the architect or the mechanical engineer. I think you're right. Everyone has to do a bit more, but I don't necessarily know if it's a new role, but everyone's probably going to have to do a bit more in order to make sure that that information is being exchanged and that the information that is being exchanged or inputted in is accurate.
Hey, my Wi-Fi seems to be working again, which is why you can see my face now. Another question I'm taking from the audience. Somebody says, great presentation. This concept is not new. It's called a single data island. but adoption has been slow due to the slow sorry, I've just lost that. Due to the slow adoption of BIM by subcontractors and the supply chain. Is the consultant built BIM model sufficient for fire records? So is BIM sufficient for fire records in this industry, basically?
I mean, I think that was a question that Stuart would be able to answer a bit more detailed. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think you're right that, you know, there is more to add probably to BIM in the sense that there are some tools available, as I said, like the BIM Fire, which I've used before, and it does help to some degree in terms of compartment plans, and you know, you can specify walls and say what fire resistance they are. So it is useful. You can put in, you know, wet riser, dry riser, fire safe signage. You can do things in there, but it probably won't be able to. I'm not sure if it can do everything and whether or not that how like the full functionality of it at this point. But I'm sure, you know, the developers will be looking into developing their tools further to kind of expand to meet all the requirements of this 8644. I mean, the document doesn't preclude analog information. It's just saying that if there is a method to not use BIM, like so if there is a gap, you can still store the information analog in an analog way on one of these kind of data depository sites. But you just have to make sure that it's combined and it's linked, and people are able to get the full suite of information. But obviously more and more the push is to kind of get everything hopefully in BIM if possible. But some of the stuff that's already been produced, like you know, alarm zones, sprinkler zones, those stuff would have had some of that information already, but it may or may not have been in that kind of format. But I don't think the information that we're being asked to produce is new per se. It's just kind of linking them all together.
Okay, just going back to the audience, there's a question from Nathan Jeju who says, it would be great to understand what your ideas around that central hub of information looks like. We would love to connect and collaborate on the future conversation around this topic, he says, but can you tell me a bit more about how that central hub of information, what it looks like and how it works and how people access it?
I mean, it's quite kind of difficult to say exactly what that is going to look like, because, you know, I can have ideas in terms of what I would like it to look like, but you know, obviously there's always more to do. But effectively, you know, we would expect that there would be some sort of kind of database where, you know, you're able to scroll through various things, or you want to look at a fire stopping and you want to understand, okay, what requirements was for this color, when is the last time it's been, you know, inspected, what's the fire resistance for the wall, you know, if there's any acoustic requirements. So it's kind of like linking everything together. Let's say you wanted to have a look at compartmentation that's easily accessible for each of the rooms within the building, or if there was any fire engineering analysis done, smoke control zones, fire suppression zones, evacuation zones, anything that is kind of like occupancy within the room. So you click on that room, you kind of get all that information at the same time. So I think that is probably what it's working towards. But it's difficult to say how it's all going to piece together at this point. But I'd like to think that you could click on a room and kind of get all the key properties, know how many people can be in the room, what the travel distances are like, you know, is it sprinkler protected, you know, all that information from all the various designers kind of combined together.
Okay, thanks, Janine. I'm going to take a question from Gary Payton. He wants to know, he says, are gateways 1, 2, and 3 and the fact there will be hard stops be a significant culture change? Inverted commas, i.e., will contractors no longer be able to build at risk?
I think that's the idea, because they're meant to be hard stops where you shouldn't progress at each state, at each gateway. So effectively, when the gateway 2 and 3 come in force, you're meant to kind of pause and wait, as my understanding, until that 12 weeks or whatever the period is, and you get the go ahead to continue. So anything outside of that, without getting like the go ahead, you would be working at risk. So it's that thing about not progressing to the next stage without having passed through the previous gateway and have had a positive feedback.
So a hard stop is exactly what it says on the tin, really, isn't it? It's a hard stop. Yeah. Okay. There's a very technical question here from Ronnie Taylor, and I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but it says, will there be further consultation with legislation on a standard filling process so all high-rise buildings are filed the same? Filled the same?
I don't know the answer to that, if I'm being honest. I'm not sure if there will be like a standardization in that way. You know, so far the standard that's been issued kind of allows the, you know, for, as I said, there is kind of this asset information requirements that, you know, you start out the project and you kind of say what's all the information you need, but it might be that there is like another framework or something that says what's the typical things that you need to make sure you have for different types of buildings. I am not sure, but before you start a job, you should really have what are the requirements of the asset at that briefing stage.
And I'll take a question from Bernard Honung, who wants to know how frequently will room integrity be tested and what methods will be used?
How frequently what, sorry? I didn't hear that.
Will room integrity be tested and what methods will be used?
Oh, I'm not sure at this point.
Yeah. I think that's the thing with a lot of this is it's still we still haven't got the detailed regulations, have we, for a lot of this stuff?
No, because there is a lot of secondary legislation that needs to come out. I mean, obviously we've got this document, the BS 8644, that's just in terms of digital management of the information and what you need to think about. But I don't know that how frequently or what. It doesn't, I don't recall it saying any of that information in there.
Yeah. And actually, I was just about to ask this as well, but Mark Jones in the audience, he wants is after some clarity around the timeline for Gateway 2 and 3. I'm slightly unclear about that as well, Janine. We're expecting regulations soon, aren't we?
From what so obviously all I know is what's on that government gateway, where it's 18 months from royal assent, in which they said that the gateway 2 and 3 process should kind of be enforced or be kind of start. So that 18 months started at the end of April. So I think maybe November next year. I am not sure exactly, but that's all I can do is go off what's on that government portal. And then I understand there might be a 6 months transition period for some buildings where effectively the building safety regulator could become the approving kind of authority, depending on where the building is in terms of whether it's done significant works on site or not. Again, all of this is still quite up in the air in terms of when exactly it's going to happen and exactly what they're going to use to define buildings that will start to get the new building safety regulator, or will the current kind of approval authorities will continue. I am not sure, but the timeline on the government website is 18 months from April.
Yeah. So about this time next year, by this time next year, then we should have got some. It should be enforced, really.
Exactly. With some sort of transition periods to buildings that are kind of in between what they would think is more progressed than others. So.
Okay. Got a question about sort of management of data and sensitivity of data, which I'd imagine is quite a key consideration. So Liam Wheatley wants to know, do you believe we can achieve data requirements from all suppliers? There may be some information that is sensitive and not applicable to sharing due to research that supplier has done to create that product. It may be the case that they do not want to share this to the wider public. So yes, do you see that being an issue where there's sensitive or commercially sensitive information that they don't want to share?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of proprietary things that companies don't necessarily want to share, but there are kind of like, for example, if they want to get CE markings and all those kind of things, they have to kind of have certain certifications, etc., in place. Hopefully there might be, I think there is some looking into products as well as a part of the new Building Safety Act, and how products are kind of validated or verified or certified. So there is some look into products that I understand is going to also take place during this 18 months. I'm not really sure what's going to come out of it, but hopefully we should have more clarity on making sure that we have the right information about products that we're going to be using within buildings, making sure that they have the right certification and that we can rely on these products being fit for use within the building.
Okay, thank you. Take a question next from Charmaine McQueen Prince, who's actually one of our columnists. She wants to know, did OFR contribute to the building safety consultation in occupation? Did OFR raise any major concerns regarding existing buildings and then new legislation and requirements?
To be honest, probably I'm not 100% sure at this point. I mean, I know that I've not personally been involved in that part of it. So there's other members in the committee, and there's so much information floating around. There's so much information being looked at. It's a lot for one or two people to be absorbed. So yeah, I can't answer that question, unfortunately, because I'm not personally involved in those kind of working groups.
Did you have any major concerns regarding existing buildings and the new legislation? Is there anything that you're concerned about, or that you think needs clarity in the legislation, or given that a lot of it is still to come to be clarified?
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things that we're all kind of, as it unfolds, we'll see. It's quite difficult to be unsure of something that is unfinished, in the sense that it's a lot of information to absorb. It's just not possible to absorb it all when it comes out. So from what I've seen, I don't, to be honest, I don't really, I'm still waiting to form an opinion. I'm just kind of dealing with trying to make sure that our clients get the right advice where we can, but it's a constantly changing environment, so you're kind of just trying to keep up, really.
Yes, I think we all are. It's a lot to get your head around. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up fairly soon. I just wondered, Janine, whether you could kind of just give us a couple of kind of key takeaways from today. Really, if you're in the construction sector, if you're a developer or a building owner, and you're thinking about these changes coming down the line, what would be your kind of key takeaways, your key advice for what people should be thinking about right now?
Yeah, I think definitely, as much as we can, trying to get information like on current projects that we're on, trying to collect as much information as we can at this point in time. Trying to start standardizing any kind of data storage, which I know it's already kind of been done, because there's a site, for projects, all these data management sites that people have been using. There is Revit models, so people have been using BIM already. So it's just trying to make sure we're coordinating things a bit more, having more information on drawings, where if we weren't going to say exactly what product it was and just say it's going to be a fire stop, maybe we should be a bit more specific now, just trying to kind of start that process of making sure that information is coordinated as much as possible, and not have it on like many separate drawings, or maybe start issuing drawing packs rather than individuals, so like they're all kind of referring to each other and kind of sit together. If the full BIM kind of process isn't available for that particular project. Yeah, and I think it's just all about us actively having to think about data and what information isn't being stored or missing or not kind of extracted and put in the right places as much as possible. So yeah, it's really important that everyone have a look at that 8644, because I think it's going to change the way in which we approach what actually is relevant information, because I think all the information is there, like in projects that we're designing. It's just how they're combined, really, and how do you want to store it so that it's easy, it's searchable, and people are able to 10 years from now go in and find what they need, and that the terminologies or the naming conventions of all the documents are consistent, and that people know who did what and when, and if things are being deleted, that we can track that to understand why. So I think that's kind of the key takeaway for me, really, about this kind of golden thread and what we need to be thinking about going forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Janine. I'm going to bring
Hello.
Sorry, I think Carl is having technical issues again. So I think he was just thanking everyone for joining the webinar, and there's going to be a lot more webinars coming up later today and the rest of this week. Oh, he's back. Right. Thank you so much, Janine. Bye. Thank you, everyone.